faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. These amazing strangers from the planet Krypton, now seen sitting with Superman!
Hello everyone, this is Sitting with Superman, and I am Alfie, otherwise known as a Geek for Fun. This time, we're going to be talking with yet another fantastic member of this little Kryptonian community of ours. One who's kind of the shepherd of it, in many senses. If they have ever typed in Superman on Twitter, or wanted to be engaged with the comic fandom, ranging from the Golden Age, to the Silver Age, to the Bronze Age, to the Modern. Any comic issue that you haven't heard of, he's probably read it and and posted a tweet about it, or finding new ways of Superman and new interactions with fans every day. It's a really great gift as a fan to be able to interact with someone like this, who not only encourages positive discourse in a time where so much fan hostility between creators and what they're putting out seems to be the norm, the influx of fan petitions because people aren't happy with things. It gets really out of hand, but especially in the comic fandom, because nerds can be goddamn passionate. But this is a guy who manages to ignore all of that and stay on topic and bring out the best of the character he's trying to encourage people to. The Lex Talk community has its ups and downs, but I think if there's any example I will go to say this is why this is a good thing, this is why I like these accounts, it has to be Let's Talk Superman. The one and only Adam. How are you, man?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you for having me.
No
Your
problem.
intro was too nice. That was very nice. Thank you.
Now, if anything, I'm underselling it because you are a treasure, man, and you absolutely do so much good to acknowledge that the guy in trunks he's an okay character. I think we both like him. He's like in the top maybe 10 characters. I don't know.
Yeah, he's fine.
On the low end.
He's all right.
He's no Batman.
Alright, it's not funny anymore.
Alright.
The bit's over.
Alright, man. This is why we bring on Adam. He will crush me down. Alright, bud. So, I guess the best place to start this would probably be the start. Is how are you introduced to Superman, if you can even remember?
It is weird. He's so ingrained in the pop culture. I don't remember a first time. Right?
Yeah.
What I remember was my older brother being giving me the classic, hey, Superman's boring, he's too powerful. Mm-hmm. Batman and Punisher are where it's at. They have no powers. They beat people up. And as a kid, I was like, well, he's the cool one, so he knows. I don't like Superman, I guess. And then I remember just daydreaming one day about how cool it was that DC had and I wasn't reading comics. I probably didn't even watch many shows. It was just, that it's just, you just know it in the background of pop culture. That I remember thinking it's cool that DC is a universe where aliens exist, magic exists, every mythology is real, And then it kind of struck me well, that's why Superman's cool, is because he's a guy who can do anything in a world where anything can happen, and that the storytelling potential is limitless.
That's crazy that you picked up on that. That takes some writers 30 years to realize.
And I will say too, now my thoughts are that, but now they're deeper emotionally. But as a kid, that's what got me, was the
versatility.
Right. It wasn't well, he's a nice guy back then. It was hey, he could punch aliens and probably has fought Hercules,
Yeah, it's like there's this character has the potential to be in any story, and I guess when you're a
Right.
kid, that's probably what appeals to a lot of people. Maybe doesn't get talked on as a lot. Is Superman kind of is the ultimate, like, you can be in his shoes, but then you can also be in any other story. Like Superman can be in fantasy stories. Superman can
Yes.
be in sci-fi stories. Like he works just fine in either setting and any setting imaginable. So yeah, you're right. He's so versatile. Like with just being able to show up, like no matter the
Yeah.
context.
Yes, exactly. And I will say too, even looking back, I kind of think, you look at old ads like in the Golden Age, and he's advertised as the world's greatest adventure character, and that's what I'm looking at now. I'm like, oh, that kind of was the idea, right?
That he'd go on adventures, not just
Yeah.
stay in one place.
Right.
And do you feel that's maybe something that the character's been missing a bit?
No, I think every writer has to do their own take, and some writers do that. But if a writer doesn't, I'm not like, hey, you don't get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're more open to just the individual styles.
Right. I like that the option's out there, but I won't put down a run per se just for being like, hey, you didn't go to space in this run, so you don't get it, you know?
Yeah, I get you. I guess then, all right. So we start off. Little Adam starts getting an inkling for Superman. He's starting to, maybe he can go anywhere. Where do you go with that? Like, is there any places that like any forms of media, be it comics, shows, or movies, which then like enhance that? Yeah. Which one of those were like your Bible?
I'd say we'd jump ahead a couple years. Because I don't even remember watching. I mean, maybe here or there, the Justice League animated show, but when I really got into it was finding a comic shop.
Uh-huh.
Right? I could walk to a comic book shop. I was lucky enough for that. And it was, I had to escape the house every now and again, and that was the perfect place to waste time, right?
Right. And that this was
So-
I don't want to go too personal, but was this like an escape from maybe some other issues, or just like was Superman
Yeah.
a savior to you in some ways?
Yeah, and comics in general. I wouldn't even say, but it was, my family was being torn apart kind of internally, and lots of issues, and it was just it was a not even like that great of a shop, but it was just kind of it was kind of the stereotypical shop that was like real small, dark, and quiet, and maybe that's kind of what I needed at that point. You know?
Yeah, you just needed a place to be able to be.
I needed a cove.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went there, and it was just they had like a table set out, and my method was just whatever cover looked cool. That's kind of what I picked up.
Mm-hmm.
Without any, that much knowledge of any writers, stories, anything like that.
So you just go from the character first, and then develop new knowledge for writers and such later on.
Right.
So the comics were directly like your big like intro to Superman being more than just an appreciation to like getting to where you are today.
Yes, and I will say my first comic would have been, I'm not going to remember, I should have looked it up before we started talking. But it was with that in mind that I was like, I want a big Superman adventure. I want to see like what this guy can do. There was a cover that I want to say was probably like Bronze Age that it was just a big explosion with Superman in the middle. And the caption is just, the day they nuked Superman.
Holy crap.
and I was like, all right, let's, and I was looking for as crazy as covers as I could get. That was the goal. I love the Silver Age wacky stuff. And that just was like, yeah, okay, let's see what happens when they nuke Superman.
I mean, how as a premise. What do you think the solicitation would that be if it came out the like DC Comics presents Superman gets nuked ...
And by the way, if my memory is right, I don't even think it happened in the comic.
Oh wow!
I think they were like missiles with kryptonite heads on them or something, sent from Master Jailer.
Oh wow! That's I gotta track that down now just for that will be put in the thumbnail of this issue somewhere.
It is a good issue. You should look it up.
Well, we go from there then to alright, after Superman gets nuked, he comes out of it with a new fan.
Yeah.
I guess then alright, barring the comics, is that the main thing? Did reading them make you want to check out the other media, or were you kind of just happy with the comics?
I was happy, and honestly still am happy with the comics. I kind of feel like, I don't want to keep going back to, these are adventure comics, because they are more than that, but that is where I believe these characters can really come to life, is from comics. I think comics are a medium where they can just completely be unleashed without, budget or having to seem realistic,
Yeah.
So I've just liked to, I've gotten the most satisfaction out of comics.
All right, I think that's completely fair. It's we're in an age now where a lot of the movies, like, you just have to look at like the numbers Avengers Endgame is making. A lot of these things are reaching audiences they never would have had in the comics. Could even dream of an Avengers comic to reach as many people as the MCU has. For the pop culture at large, it's starting to become that is the source material. That is the main exposure they have to these characters. And with Superman, he kind of was that for a while, but he was so, because he started this whole thing, is like he went through phases where like he starts off with the comics as like his main exposure, then you get the radio show, and then you get the George Reed TV show, and then you get the Christopher Reeve movie, and then there's kind of a lull period where you get like Lois and Clark and Smallville, but it's not really as big. I guess it's just because there hasn't really been another big universally loved Superman adaptation.
Yes.
It kind of comes down to that the comics for him are always the main source material for a lot of people.
And I do believe that that's just where he was made to thrive at.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's why. I don't want to say it's impossible to make a good not a good Superman movie, but a Superman movie that represents everything that he is. I kind of think requires a lot of time and focus, whereas a character maybe like Batman, he's an immediate appeal, right?
Yeah.
You see him and his look and you get it immediately. And with Superman, you get people I think are immediately attracted to the flying and maybe the look, but you really fall in love with the character through a good amount of time of really studying him, if that makes sense.
Superman's a character where he benefits from reflection.
Yes.
I think that's I guess how you've made an entire Twitter account based on that.
Yeah, and that's arguably my mission, and I'm still learning stuff, I think.
Right. I guess that's a good thing to maybe segue to is, where does this come in? Where does your fandom evolve to the point where you decide to give this idea a go?
So the history of there's what they call the Let's Talk community of, basically someone picks a character and they make their account, Let's Talk. I'll just, the first one to come to mind, Captain Cold. There's a Let's Talk Captain Cold who I like. And, the idea is I just love this character. That's what I want to talk about. It started with a Let's Talk Captain Marvel. And he was like a guy who, that was the account I kind of like, this is my favorite account. Like, it's just talking about Shazam, which I loved, and I was like, I was going to ask him, like, hey, would you mind if I do this too? And as I was about to ask him that, he said, like, hey, great news, now there's a Let's Talk Aquaman. So I'm like, oh, great, can I do it too? And he's like, yeah, everyone do it, everyone make one. And it sprung out from there. So from there was, like, the originals, I think, were Let's Talk Shazam, Aquaman, then me, then my buddies who I still talk to this day, and we're close, and like some great fans, Flash, Wonder Woman, and there was a Let's Talk Supergirl, and it blew up from there. And I think I've tried to keep it in the spirit of, I'm just going to talk about what I want to talk about, even if it's not what the most popular movie is right now. It can just be what I'm reading. It can just be something I've noticed in an obscure comic. And if people like it as much as me, that's great.
Right. And more so, if what I'm aware, because I believe I managed to see a couple of Let's Talk Captain Marvel before, like back in the day. But
yeah,
he definitely, and you follow that mold where, comparatively, I'm not throwing any shade because people have different approaches to this. I think that's fine. But you definitely keep it more focused on the core idea of what this account's meant to be.
Yeah, and not that there's one idea.
Yeah.
But I try to keep it. I just want to talk about what I love, frankly, and that is Superman is on my brain too often, arguably. I think it would be interesting to a therapist how often I'm talking about Superman.
Well, I mean, this is effectively what this podcast is. We're sitting on the couch as we talk about Superman in therapy sessions.
Yeah, what are you writing in your notebook, by the way? I see you scribbling a lot, studying me.
A lot of Kryptonian sigils here. Note to self, he knows nothing, and I just rip off my hair and it's like a bald, and I'm just sleeper.
Will not take off cape in public.
Refuses to wear anything but trunks for formal occasions. All right then, so we get with that's crazy because I've seen a lot of fan accounts and then no, but the Let's Talk community is very it's a lot more interactive because normally fan accounts are dedicated to solely the character. And while that is true, you're dedicated to a character, you are also engaging in discussions. You also ask questions of like the day and stuff. Like, what made you take that approach? And have you had any good moments of doing so?
That was part of it at the beginning. You say, Let's Talk Shazam at the time he was. His name's Carl. I forget his last name right now, but he's a great guy. He's no longer that. He's now just Carl. Something.
He's adopted a secret identity.
Yeah, right. He's retired from the community, and he was the first guy that I would be like, "Hey, I like New 52 Shazam," and he's like, "I don't agree, but let's talk about it." And it was like really, really respectful back and forth, and I was like, "That's great. Like that's part of it." And he was a fan account, but also just a guy, right? And that's kind of what I've strived to be, and I think what is most fun to be online.
Yeah, definitely, because I try to do this as well. Is so many different opinions, and I'm more curious about what you think of this. But do you find that the comic fandom can get too protective of their own opinions sometimes?
I think it's obviously yes, but it's just so much healthier to find the people who are willing to have a back and forth instead of immediately planting themselves on the most extreme side of something. Right. And that's kind of what I've done is the people who respond to me with a question of why do you think that way? I don't think that way. Or like, can you explain this to me? Or I really cherish that. And I've had wonderful discussions with many people in the comic book community who are, have opinions and want to have a back and forth with it instead of yelling at somebody.
Mm-hmm. And definitely, I've seen a couple of your interactions with those, and the way you handle stuff there is very respectful. And I'm curious, because you mentioned your comic shop, did you ever get into discussions in the comic shop with people around that to kind of build up this more level-headed? Because I feel like when you're talking to someone face to face, you normally are much calmer, and like even people who have wildly different opinions will normally be a bit more respectful. But online, because you've got that anonymity, people kind of go crazy.
Mm-hmm. For me personally, online is where I'm fortunate enough to have these conversations. I am just like, there's not much of a community where I'm at, despite having a comic book shop. There's not any cons here. So for me, it's just been online, and it's when you find the right people, it's great.
I relate to that. Again, the UK, so comic fandom's much lower, and like when you say you can walk to a comic book shop, I'm like, I have to take the bus if I wanted to. And even then, it's like a forbidden planet. Yeah. It's like a not.
I've just been lucky with the shop.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I guess we have a lot of your idea of like, okay, you want to talk about Superman and stuff. So I want to propose this to you. It's like, let's talk Superman. Where do you, if you had to pick like some stories that you feel like these are what best recommend, these are what makes Superman to me, what would be the first things from the top of your head?
God, you'd think I would have something right off the bat, but it's a morphing list, right?
Yeah, right.
Obviously, I have to say All-Star is that's my number one. Everybody knows that, right? That's everything I've been describing. It's the embracing of every idea. It's the heart of the character. That's who Superman is to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Outside of that, stories, right? What's the question?
So it's like any stories you'd recommend to people for why you like Superman, for maybe people listening to this that aren't as invested in the character.
Right. I think I said recently, like, the most common thing you hear of with Superman is like, he's too powerful, he doesn't have any weaknesses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Superman Kryptonite is a story I recommend a lot. That's Darwin Cook writing, Tim Sale on art. And it's about the story is about before he encountered Kryptonite, the first time he encounters Kryptonite, and him being scared if he hasn't discovered if anything hurts him yet. And it's the whole story is about his vulnerability emotionally, more so than Kryptonite, and that's a big story I would recommend. For All Seasons, of course, is a big one. It's a great one people don't talk about a lot is Len Wein's run on DC Comics Presents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I believe he did a team up with Aquaman, first appearance of Mongol with Martian Manhunter and Supergirl, and maybe a Metal Men story. I can't remember if that was him or not. And maybe OMAC as well. I can't remember if it was OMAC or Infinity Man. I think it was OMAC. And every one of his stories are very much about allowing Superman to feel emotion as well as his physical battles.
Right. And I guess this is the elephant in the room I kind of ask to most guests when I talk to them, is just because it's such a common thing, and it's you normally ask writers, even people working at DC, like even Dan DiDio says this, is like you talk to them, and although they've got such a access to the history of Superman, they always default to the he's too powerful line diatribe. How do you feel about that? Because it is, yes, he has been so exaggerated powerful and stuff like that, but do you necessarily feel like that is something that does need to be toned down, or do you think people are blowing out proportion?
I say tone it up. Get rid of Kryptonite.
Yeah. Go ahead. Explain it.
It's hard to not just quote Morrison here, right? When he talks about, well, it's the emotional pains that people relate to, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it can be too much of a crutch to be like, for a writer to think, how can I physically hurt him? And they're like, oh, what if this person has a kryptonite laser, or a kryptonite sword? Like, just think of, what troubles you're having that day and tell the Superman version of it. And that, I don't believe that's often, I got shot at from a laser often,
Wow, in your case. Speaking for myself, I got a laser to my foot last week, and boy, it doesn't help when it's kryptonite as well, man. It's not easy. But you go off about your problems, I'll just deal with my laser burn wounds.
Hey, sorry, there's a giant chimp outside. Let me
Now there's a deep hole. Alright, so I'm with you, because it is, the word you use there, crutch, such a good phrase for it. Is kryptonite for a lot of people is a crutch, because they feel like they can't tell conflict without it, but it's kind of missing the point that Superman, yes, he's in action comics, but the fact that he does the action is never the problem. You just have to go back to the earliest Siegel and Shuster. Superman doesn't really have any problems dealing with a threat. It's the ethics behind a threat that's the problem. It's like corrupt landlords or people who abuse their wives. Is like, just because Superman can stop the abuser, that doesn't make the wife feel any better, because she's still got to deal with that shit. Like, that is human stories.
Yes. I would even say back then, early stages of the character, he wasn't necessarily a moral, Christ figure, but the idea seemed to be, how would this guy solve our problems? And that is a really interesting idea of a fantasy of, like, how do we, like, the fantasize, like, how would this problem go away? How can this guy be a savior? Is more interesting than watching him in a fist battle.
Yeah. Not
that can't exist too, but I think a perfect story happens when you marriage all these ideas together.
I think that's a very definite, that's a good idea, and I guess maybe that's a good way to segue, because I've kind of got a structure on mind for this that I want to ask you about, because I want to get a full breadth of your take of the character, because you are someone who does know every era of Superman, and I'll kind of get into each era individually, if that's fine. So with Golden Age, you asked an interesting question on Twitter a couple of days ago, maybe a week back now at this point. But it was, do you feel like this, because Superman back then was a little bit more rough and tumble. He wasn't as gentle with people. He wasn't as polite. He would throw people out windows and catch them to find them. Do you feel like that kind of spirit is still? Do you think taking that away? Do you think softening Superman up was a good thing, or does it, like, what's your take on that in general?
I think it was a good thing. I think obviously we owe Siegel and Shuster everything, right? This isn't meant to disrespect what they've done, but it is a character that's benefited from so many different takes and ideas as an art form and evolved to the point where we are now. And that's a big part of why I love looking at every era, right? Is because he's more than a character. He is an art form that every generation can imprint their ideas on. And that's so much more interesting to me than keep this guy the same always, right? Sorry, what was the question?
So just thoughts on Golden Age, yeah. So it'd be freeform, man. No worries.
So yeah, he was. I don't believe he was perfected first shot. I don't think many characters are, and that's not a dig at the creators or anything, right? That's just it's evolved.
It's like
And that's good.
Batman started. He didn't even have Alfred. He was like
Right.
And that's such a you tell that to most casual fans and like what, how? Because it's such an integral part of the character for why he works. But it wasn't. He had Robin before he had Alfred.
Right, and even saying like, well, he used a gun this one issue, which I think people think that he did all the time, but I think I read it's only one issue he really ever aimed a gun at a person, or at an enemy. But yes, he did do that in the beginning, but can we now admit that writers looking at that over time have made something more interesting to come from not using guns,
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that we've now gotten to a point where we've said, if Superman is what we want him to be in our heads, if he's the height of moral, what's the word?
Moral, just morality, I guess.
Right, yeah, just morality. Then what does that perspective affect this? How does that affect this guy with all these powers? And I think it does lead to more interesting stories.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess going from that, we then move into the Silver Age. Shit starts to get weird.
Yeah.
How do you feel about, because again you mentioned a good point of people adding on to this, is how do you feel about the sudden burst of mythology we got of Superman in the Silver Age, where we introduced all the family and all the pets and everything? Like, how do you feel about that?
I will say, so this is the initial era that I was like, that's what I want to see. Just just my interest peaked when I looked at covers of just, like I said before, like one week he's fighting a giant chimp with kryptonite laser eyes, and the next week he's meeting a family of yellow aliens from Saturn or whatever. And it's a weird thing because a lot of it came from censorship of not being allowed to be what he was in the beginning, right?
Yeah, a bit more. He can't be fighting gangsters and stuff.
But that is when people sort of started doing what I like to see, which is saying, what am I feeling today? And then how does that translate to crazy superheroics? Like, I feel like if somebody has survivor's guilt, they maybe have a reason to create the bottle city of Kandor. And I think that's where a lot of our best mythology came from, was these emotions given form from crazy concepts.
I think that's a very good way to frame the bottle city of Kandor, because it is such a it's such a morbid reminder that he keeps around for such a positive character. Mm-hmm. It lets you know so much more about him as a guy. Just the very concept of Superman, the most welcoming and like he'll hang out with you whenever you want to guy, having a fortress of solitude. Like, when you really say that out loud, it tells you a lot. Like, okay, he's nice, but Clark in many ways is more of a loner than Batman, because he, for a long time, his biggest emotional crux was like, I don't want Lois Lane to know the truth about me. I can't handle that. I can't let people know who I am. Only like Spider-Man has that, and even then Spider-Man like is really bad at keeping his identity a secret. Superman's really good at it, surprisingly. Like, especially back in the early days. Yeah, to a fault.
Like you mentioned, keeping his identity away from Lois. That was a bad part of Superman in the Silver Age, I would say, because it was to the point of like, get away from here, woman. Yeah, like, it was very like, and obviously they made Lois pining to be a housewife and have his children, and Superman was essentially just, being single and not being with Lois may have been his most primary goal at some point.
It wasn't defeating Luther or bringing world peace. It was
Right.
like, I don't want commitment.
Right. Yeah, the amount of Silver Age Superman issues that are about tricking people
It was the era
is
of
insane.
super dickery.
Right. But you read those issues and you can't deny that they're a ton of fun to read.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, as I said before, it was still Superman before he evolved into what he is now, which I think is excellent.
Mm-hmm. So it's very much, from what I'm gathering, is it's the golden age is where we have the idea is birthed. That is the fetus of the idea. It's crying, it's screaming, it's scrappy, it's unrefined. When we get to the Silver Age, it's kind of the young. He's like a kid now. Like the idea's got like he's a toddler. He's got older and he's got unrivaled imagination, but he's also kind of a dick because of that imagination has no boundaries of morality.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it.
So then we move into the Bronze Age, and what I like to call this is the Alan Moore emo teen introspective teen phase, and we get a lot of my favourite stories here from Alan Moore and Magan.
Yep, I would agree. Yeah, that's definitely when he was like, let's look at the world. Oh my god, it's not perfect. Oh, everything is... I have to sit in my fortress and wallow about this for a while, right?
But it's also like we're still keeping... We're not quite at Burn yet, where the Silver Age is out. We're still before that, so we've still got the wildness, but we're looking at the wildness a little bit more like, okay, how Morrison does so, where, okay, we're not trying to make this world realistic, we're trying to make our world more like this world. Let's look at, what if you actually lived in a universe where everyone in Metropolis was turned into gorillas like on a weekly basis? Like, what would that do to people emotionally? And that's where we start getting into like Miracle Monday has a great passage where we start getting into how Superman defines Clark Kent. And this is where I want you, this is a big one that I'm very curious about your thoughts on. It's a question many writers, all valid, like Mark Waid has a different take than Grant Morrison and such. But like, where do you stand on who is the real guy? Because the Bronze Age is where this is really started to tack on. Is you get who is it? Superman pretending to be Clark Kent, as like Siegel says, is Superman disguised as reporter Clark Kent, or is it Clark Kent trying to be Superman, or is it something else?
Right, you're right. So I think we've had this discussion before here. Magan seemed to be the first person to say, like, no, it makes sense for Clark to be the person, right?
No, Magan was, Clark was the invention by Superman.
Oh, who am I thinking? Anyway. But I, for a while, thought, oh, it has to be Clark. Mm-hmm. Now, I kind of feel like the way I describe it is you act a different way at work than you do with your family, but neither is less you, I don't think. You act a different way when you're with your, romantic partner than with your father, but you don't... both are still you. I think that Superman is the Man of Steel because he is an alloy of sorts. He's a blend of all of these different experiences, and neither are less true just because they go by a different name.
I think that's a good way to put it. I guess then, because a lot of people have different takes on Clark Kent and how far from Superman he should be. You get the Byrne stuff where he actually is basically just Superman without cape.
Right.
But then you get like the Christopher Reeve version where he's a lot more bumbling and a lot more like of a coward and stuff. How do you like... How far should Clark push that he acts differently when he's around the Daily Planet crew? Like, do you think he should be going out of his way to disguise himself, or do you think this is where he gets to be himself a bit more?
I believe my ideal version, I would say, because I like them all, but would be Clark can act a little bit goofy at times. He can he's still being him, but if he wants to, act like he tripped, and and the best stories are when he trips and pushes the guy out of the way of a falling boulder, and it was just like, hey, that was lucky, right?
That best bit in All Star, like in the back of that book, it has Grant Morrison saying he wanted to make sure that even as Clark Kent, he's still saving people.
Right. And I think that's he can have his voice an octave higher, but it's not a lie, right? It's just this is who Clark. That's how he disguises his potential, I would say. But I like my Clark to have a little bit more character than. You can still tell he's like a ripped guy under the jacket, and he's just like, I like a little nerdy Clark, and I think that's a big part of why the character is successful. Is that's how the reader sees themselves in Clark, and why it's such a powerful moment when he rips open that jacket, right, and it's reveals all the potential.
One of the most iconic things is everyone wishes everyone's got this self that only if people knew who they really were when they were at their best, then people would understand them. That's why the Lois Lane Clark Kent relationship has such drama, and it's why it's lasted so long and become one of the great comic book romances, because it is it's based on such human emotions of just two people who would be perfect for each other, but they don't know everything about each other.
Yeah, because Superman is the ultimate, 80s movie, nerdy girl with the glasses, and then she takes them off, and then she's like, oh my god. When she puts her hair down, she's actually crazy hot and confident.
This is... I just now needed Clark Kent to have next Superman movie needs to have Clark Kent have, a makeup transformation scene from one of those films, where he walks down to cheesy pop music.
Lois's friends are like, oh, I dare you to change him into a dateable person. It's like, oh my god, he was hot all along. Who knew?
He just walks out of the Superman costume. Oh, that's interesting. So, okay, I like that take. I've for a long time I've always stood on the Superman side a bit more, but I feel like we've gotten a nice place now where we're kind of at both are real, where it isn't as distinct as the Silver Age used to be, where Clark Kent was entirely a disguise, or in the post-crisis where Superman was entirely a disguise and Clark Kent was just the real guy. We've got a nice middle ground now, which I think is perfect, where, like you said, you express yourself differently at different places, and I like Clark being a little, because this is the thing I like about Superman is when it's not like Batman, where Batman is deliberately putting on a performance, because he knows criminals are a cowardly, superstitious lot. He's putting on the cape. He doesn't think he's actually a giant bat. He's putting it on to scare people. He knows he's doing an act. Superman's being Superman. He's not putting on a performance. He's always being genuine when he offers someone help. But when he's Clark Kent as well, I feel like everyone kind of needs to be able to be a loser sometimes. I think everyone deserves to just have those days where you just want to lie around and do nothing. Even Superman needs an outlet where he's allowed to be scared sometimes and act cowardly, because you need to get those emotions out of you, because it's not embarrassing. It's not making Clark Kent a joke, even though sometimes he can be funny. It's making a full picture of the human experience and not saying any one part of it should be excluded. He's not saying Superman can never be scared or cowardly or have doubts or fear or such. While he's in the costume, he may not, but when he's Clark, that all comes out, and I think that's important.
Yeah, Clark allows him to feel the full rainbow of emotions, and it is, I think, a problem in how fans view characters is them being introduced to a character as let's say if Batman's always angry and then he has a moment where he smiles, you can't say that's out of character. Nobody is feeling one emotion all the time. That's just crazy to think about. I think fans need to allow for the full range to happen.
Yeah, it makes the characters more layered and more like
Yeah.
people rather than just archetypes.
Right.
Which I think is interesting. Okay, so then I think Bronze Age introspection's kind of been dealt with. We've kind of moved away from that. And now DC started to send the trend of, this is where, and I'm curious about this as well, maybe a more meta way, this is where Superman's popularity starts to dip, is post-Crisis. John Byrne gets on the book. Dark Knight Returns happens during this, like in between that and this, before Crisis. And that one panel of Batman punching out Superman in Dark Knight Returns kind of signaled Batman becoming DC's top dog forever and for the rest of time. How do you feel about where the character goes from there?
I think that was a necessary step in the evolution. Because what happened there was they leaned full into, let's talk about the earthbound human emotions. But as I've said before, the perfect balance is including everything, right? Including, don't be ashamed to have Bizarro be just like a weird backwards guy from a square planet. And that's there was a feeling of like embarrassment of, we can't have a space cowboy, make him a guy in a robot suit, you know?
Yeah.
But I do very much respect that and enjoy a lot of the stories for saying, hey, we've never really dived into what Perry White might think about this and how is he feeling in this moment. And it's a necessary part, but the balance just wasn't there yet. And that it was to be perfected later, I believe.
Yeah, if we're gonna go back to the analogy of the idea of Superman growing, is we've just got out of the teen phase and now we're at the first work phase where you have to get rid of all the weird shit out of your life and appear to be normal because it's now time to be an adult. But you're still not your true self because you're too self-conscious.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
So we've kind of got that, and we have Superman's idea of being in pop culture kind of where the idea of him boring comes in, because once you take away like the chimps and like he's not doing so crazy Silver Age adventures, but at the same time you're not doing the political stuff you did in the Golden Age where you're making him very left wing and like this is the most right wing era of Superman is the Byrne era.
Well,
but Superman's never really right wing. Like
he was the most
comparatively
nationalist.
Yeah,
he was the most nationalist then.
This was
the stories were still pretty left wing.
Yeah, this is the most anti-American way Superman I meant.
Yes.
When I say that again, it says it further than I mean it, because Superman as a character is never fully like he's always, even when he gets to the end, he's always just like middle ground. He's never one thing or the other. He's either very far left or very middle ground. He's never far right, unless you're doing like the Nazi versions.
Right.
But yeah, so like this is where the truth, justice, and the American way comes in.
Yes.
How do you feel about that? Because the American way got added in the radio show, I believe, right?
The American way, yes, you're right, and it got added because they thought Golden Age Superman was too communist sounding when his tagline was "Champion of the Hopeless and Oppressed,"
and truth and justice.
Right. And so I say that was the superior tagline. And it's kind of, and the American way is kind of something that now almost haunts the character, where writers have to justify, when they say the American way, they mean the philosophy of America as a concept, not a country, not the government. Whereas, you know, it's something that has added a little bit of ick to what I believe should be a universal defender.
Right, and I'm with you there entirely. And I feel like it's given the character baggage that he didn't need to have. Because, like, someone like Captain America is always going to have to deal with that. And that's where his best stories come from, is where you get to challenge the idea of what is the American way versus what the American public is actually doing. That's good for him. I don't think it's so good for Superman, because he could be doing more than that. He's supposed to be talking on a global level of what is humanity doing versus what the humanity way is, not just one country.
And have you ever talked about, like, as someone in the UK, have you read the words "and the American way" and been like, oh, all right, I guess?
That is my reaction every time. Is I'm just like, oh.
It's like, all right, well, I'm kind of over here, but
it's like, you do you, Clark. I mean, I'm fucked. If I'm gonna get in trouble, like, this is why fucking the Superman Red Sun, he saves the UK from the American Bizarro. So I'm like, fuck it, I'm with the communist Superman. He's the only one saving the UK. The American Superman is all the way over there. So, like, I'm with Senor Superman. But, it's one of those things where it's given the character some weight, and a lot of like, Superman Returns, the movie, kind of had this problem, is they got a bit too, like, Bryan Singer really liked the idea of the American way. I mean, that's fine for an interpretation, but we again, I think we've both got the line as Superman's such a versatile character, you can kind of do anything with him, and as long as you do it well, I'm kind of fine. I don't. Is the problem is it also kind of, when you're talking about maybe reasons why Superman's popularity has dipped, and Batman took his place, is even Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman doesn't really have this problem, even though she's wearing American colours as well, is she's never representing the American way or anything, so especially with her recent boom in popularity through the movies, she's once again an international figure. And Batman obviously never has any connection, because his old gimmick is gothic. But Superman does have that baggage that has limited his national appeal. And while it's given him a lot, I get people always comparing, like, is Superman and apple pie are, like, the most American things ever? Like, they're the two greatest American inventions. But, like, having him being so associated to that country diminishes his impact as a figure of, like, those issues where Superman stands in front of the UN kind of have this baggage of this, like, some people, I've talked to some fans who have been like, this guy's just the manifestation of America going into different countries and telling them they know best, and that's why they don't like Superman. Yeah,
that's interesting. I think there does need to be, because it's a fine line, because it is a point of pride for America that he is an American art form, and I think, comics are a great American art form, influenced by lots of other parts of the world, obviously. There needs to be a understanding of Superman can be proud to be from Kansas in the heart of America, but not make that his whole mission statement.
Right. Especially when, like, you look at some Poland figures and, like, Kansas ain't looking so good for some reality there. Someone needs to maybe mention that when, like, Mara and Barkan are the only good people in them. I don't know, that's an exaggeration on my part, but, like, obviously it's like it's something the character is more and more getting associated with. And maybe this is another idea as we move past I don't even know what you would call it, but, like, the post-crisis era, where we're now into the modern age, like New 52, I guess, is where a good place to go is. How did you feel about that for Superman?
It's interesting. I just recently had read the first arc of the Superman title for New 52.
Right. And
I was like, this is pretty good. And obviously I loved Action Comics by Morrison. It was a new take, which I approve of. I think he is something who should keep evolving, but that's not where he should stop, if that makes sense.
No, I agree.
There were some interesting ideas. There were some ideas that didn't work. But ultimately, I think it's enjoyable as a experiment, if that makes sense.
One big thing about this experiment now, I'm kind of curious on, because I don't think we've ever spoke about this specifically. I kind of want to get into, what are your preferences for what Superman's costume not only should look like, but what do you like it to be made of? Do you like it to be obviously some tougher armor, or do you prefer the Mark Kent made it for him?
I prefer it to be... I think it should be indestructible. I like the idea of it being from Krypton as the last... Not last, but the thing he keeps closest to him as his piece from home, his final gift from his birth parents as they sent him off.
His baby blanket.
His baby blanket that he was wrapped in to protect him, and in ways still protects him.
Yeah, that is a really good... it's such a... It adds to some of this religious imagery of not so Jesus, but more Moses. Is very much the idea of wrapping the child and sending him down the river and hoping he's safe. And these parents, sometimes my favorite interpretations are when they have no idea and it's just a shot in the dark, and and that adds to the tension of the moment, and they just like, okay, we have no other choice but this, let's hope. And it's kind of why I like that is because it gives Superman kind of evidence in when he preaches about hope, because he's like, look, I'm only here because my parents hoped on a 1,000,001 shot, and that's why I believe in it so hard. I think that's a good example. I don't know where you stand on that.
I think that's the best explanation of hope I've ever heard. I've always kind of put my nose up at when people say like Superman represents hope, because I'm like, you can kind of say that about every superhero, you know.
Yeah.
But what you just said that was good. I agree with that.
Well, there we go. Thank you. This is why I like to do this, because you've shown me different perspectives as well, which I appreciate. But yeah, the idea of it being a last vestige from Krypton is good, and the New 52 kind of, and more so just modern comics in general. I guess I'll get your take on this while I'm on the subject. Sure. How much of Krypton do you like still being around?
God, it's not much, honestly. I do think, despite what I've said about saying he should be the ultimate adventure character, I do tend to like when his stories are truly about his relationship with Earth, his relationship with humans. I think his best villains represent problems in humans and world Earth problems. Like if, Parasite represents greed and Metallo represents heartlessness. Lex, a whole list of every human and world problem. I'm sure he's fought some sort of sludge monster that represents pollution that I can't think of right now.
In some like environmental issue.
Right.
If you've seen, oh my god, I don't know if you've seen like those old adverts where Superman fought nicotine.
Right, exactly. I like the nicotines of the Superman universe more so than the this is a thing from Krypton that's come back to haunt you.
Yeah.
And if we can go back to the Golden Age for a minute, I think that was the intent, was to be like, he's here to discuss Earth problems. Siegel and Schuster they had Krypton for like maybe one panel, and then we're like, that's just the excuse of the powers.
Right.
And for their full 1 or 2 first years, I don't think they mentioned Krypton again. I don't think they mentioned it again until maybe the Silver Age.
Or at least getting there from maybe stuff from the radio show, mentioned it now and again, but yeah,
Radio
it was
show, yeah,
not the
I'm talking
focus
comics,
at all.
yeah. I believe the first person to say, like, let's revisit it was Bob Kane. Or not Bob Kane. Bill Finger. And that was probably late 50s.
Yeah, that is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. Is because how I like Krypton is I like it to be, because we're sticking with this idea that I really like that you mentioned of the ultimate adventurer, as I never heard someone quite phrase it like that, but I'm totally with it. I like the idea of the tragedy of the ultimate adventurer is the ultimate location, the place of the Superman is the one place he can never go to. Like that's
the Hercules angle.
The home, he can visit anywhere and be any place except for his home, and that adds so much weight to it.
Yeah.
And especially with the because how important Superman is as an immigrant metaphor. It as like he's alone in a new land and he's trying to make his best of it.
Not just immigrant, refugee.
Yeah, precisely. And that's only getting more and more relevant as time goes on.
Yeah. It might not be something that goes away anytime soon. It's a timeless arc.
It's something he'll always have to deal with because we'll always have to deal with.
Right.
So then, one thing we're kind of covering a lot of ground here. The biggest change to mythology, I feel, is the Rebirth era, where we introduced Superman being a father. How do you feel about that?
I think that's great. That was one of a huge change, but one that I don't think faced a lot of backlash, and I think that is because it felt natural, right?
Yeah.
I think that for a lot of people, including me, Superman was already a father figure, and to make that literal it just felt right?
Yeah, he's the ultimate big brother and he's the ultimate father at the same time, which is like he's special in that way.
Yeah, and I think the stories, it opened up a new perspective. It opened up new ways to tell a Superman story. And I think they're doing great stuff with John even now. I think it's still a mind to be tapped, and that's exactly what you need for an 80-year-old character.
Yeah, and we just passed Action Comics 1000 a little while back, which is insane. How, I guess my thing is, because we did a good history thing of the eras and stuff, and you've been exposed to so many, and you've talked to so many different people, so many different opinions. Where do you think the character should go from here? Where would you like to see if you were put in charge of the Superman books? Is like, maybe this is the focus we should take next time. I know it's such a big concept, but even just as broad as you can, what's your gut feeling on it? It doesn't have to be elaborated on.
It is a tough question. I mean, I want to say it's what I want to see is keep experimenting, keep surprising me. So I can't answer put on a writer and artist who haven't done it before to an extent. What I would hope is don't be ashamed of any part of the history. Embrace all of it. Talk about the little things that maybe some writers have overlooked. We don't go into super smelling a lot. Maybe explore how that affects them. Don't be ashamed of super ventriloquism. I just read a comic with them doing that today, and I was like, he did this a lot.
It's handy, fuck. Yeah,
it wasn't like a thing that happened in one comic, and people are like, "Oh, that's funny." Like he did it often. But just don't be afraid of the giant chimps. Don't be afraid of. In fact, that's what I want. I want a Titano mini
Titano graphic novel, 12-issue
Yeah,
mini by
yeah.
Tom King, where he just looks sad at a skyscraper and remembers King Kong.
Yeah, I want that. I'm excited for the future that I can see now with the Jimmy Olsen books coming out, Lois
And the
Lane
Lois-
book coming out. Yeah,
But kind of going back to the Silver Age, where those two are getting their own books.
right. And they look like they're saying, what are the best parts of these characters, and how do we make that uniquely ours as well? That's what I love to see.
No, I think that's a very good answer. So like, big thing, I guess, that we haven't touched on is, in terms of Superman, we've talked about the big guy himself a lot, but are there any members of Superman's supporting cast, be they villains or the just regular people he hangs around with, that you feel speak to you a lot? Like, if you had to say, in the Superman universe, who is your second favorite character besides Superman, who would it be?
Oof. It's Lois, definitely, but it's an ever morphing list, right? I would
Yeah.
say Lois, not so much, but because she would remind me of, this is something we as humans can do, is speak up, and also, on the flip side of that, she also reminds me of my fiance, and so
And I want to get into
that's
that as
just
well.
like this is a quick.
Adam
thing.
here's getting married.
Yay.
At the time of this recording, maybe when this goes up, he might already be hitched. But like,
Yeah, June 15th.
as someone going into that, do you feel like, because marriage in comics is such a divisive topic for a lot of people, especially some editorial. Spider-Man went through a whole thing. How do you feel on when people say that Superman and Lois Lane don't work if they're married? Some people, for example, Mark Miller is very on the fence that he feels like Lois Lane should never find out that Superman is Clark Kent.
I think it's a character-to-character basis, but in case of Superman, I think thinking that way is too stagnant. It's against my philosophy I've been preaching about maybe too much, that you gotta keep evolving. And if Superman represents, if his best stories are about super versions of our lives, we get married too. We probably went through that phase where we didn't let the person we had a crush on see every part of ourselves, but we also moved on, and those stories aren't going away. You can still pick them up,
And you can always, the beauty of Superman is you can always, because he's being reinvented so often, there's so many origin stories of Superman, like, you can always still tell that story of, if you want to tell Clark Kent as Lois Lane, but Lois Lane doesn't know he's Superman, you can always just do a story set in the past with that. There's plenty of time.
Yeah, Elseworlds, which, and to their defense, I imagine not every writer can just say, hey, I want to do an Elseworld, and they give it to them.
That's true.
But yeah, I think it's best to acknowledge that we always have to move forward. We can't stay in one place. I think I appreciate every past era, but I wouldn't say I'm nostalgic towards them, because the difference of nostalgia and thinking of the past fondly is you accept that past isn't the definitive, and it can't and maybe shouldn't come back.
You just use it as a learning curve.
Yes.
I think it's a very good, very mature outlook on that. Specifically, we're talking about a guy who wears his underwear on the outside and flies around fighting bald men. But yeah, it's just the guy has had such a evolution, more so than most. Like, Batman had an evolution, and Wonder Woman is still constantly evolving. but it doesn't seem as drastic as it seems a lot more in subtle ways than Superman, who Silver Age Superman is a wildly different character than Golden Age Superman, who's a wildly different character than Bronze Age Superman. They're all their own person, but they're all still Superman. And I think that's a good way to emphasize what you've been doing with Let's Talk Superman, is by getting people to join in on that conversation, you get to see their Superman, and everyone has their own image of Superman.
Yes, I would. If I had one mission statement, this is more than a character. As pretentious as that sounds, it is an art form. That's such a special, unique thing that we should embrace. That every generation can have their version, right? Like, there's so little characters that can do that beyond comics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, even, there's only really one version of Hercules, even though he's been around forever. There's only really one version of Zorro, even though he predates Batman. But to embrace that these characters can have different perspectives is it's the healthiest way to consume comics, and it's the most enjoyable way to consume comics.
I think that's pretty spot on. One, maybe just wrapping up a little bit here, because I feel like you've managed to really emphasize the entire history of the character here, which I'm quite proud of. You did, man. You did excellent.
Oh, thank you. I have more to say, but
no. I'm still going with this. Is as a guy who's doing this with Let's Talk Superman, is you've done so well at that. I kind of forget how many followers you have on Twitter, but it's a lot. Where do you want to go from here? If you do you have any goals of what you want to do with the character, or as a person with this character you have?
Not any huge ambitions, to be honest with you. I don't know if that's a boring answer.
No, it's fine.
I just want to be a guy who talks about what he likes and discuss that with people. And I hope people don't see me as like a service of some sorts, if that makes sense.
You want to make sure you're seen as a person still.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I would from here I would like to. I do like recording these. I like where I'm at, to be honest.
I think that's good. I think that's an honest answer. That's the most important thing, because it takes people underestimate how valuable contentment can be. Is being able to be comfortable and say, I know I like where I at, means you've done good to get here. So you should be proud of that in and of itself, man. That's great.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
But yeah, we've basically gone over everything Superman in a general sense. But before we close up, I guess I want to say, have there been any versions or stories with Superman, or different alternative takes, or just ideas of Superman that have meant a lot to you that we haven't covered yet?
I mean, we didn't go deep into All-Star. That's big. But
that deserves its own podcast with you, man.
Right, that's its own podcast. I think we covered a lot. We could have discussed what's happening right now, but maybe that's its own thing, right?
No, I think even that's fine. Because
that's where the gold comes from, is experiencing it in the moment a lot, week to week, and that's what maybe affects me most is this is what's happening for my generation.
Mm-hmm. Because we are kind of moved past the rebirth era at the moment. We Bendis and Heroes in Crisis and everything, it has kind of, rebirth has ended almost in its sense. Is we've moved into a new era that's kind of undefined. We're in new territory, and reading Superman week to week now that Bendis, for the first time, we've got a writer on both books, is Do you think that's a good idea, that we got Action and Superman with the same writer but doing different things, or would you maybe like to have them be a bit more distinct?
I very much respect that he's the idea of having him take up both books is a little debatable. Maybe they should have, at least made an equivalent of Adventures of Superman when they had in the New 52, at the digital version, where they're like
fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. Where any writer could come in and put in their, because he rules everything that happens to Superman right now. One person, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm not complaining. I think he's approached it very, very well, and he is bringing in, more voices and different perspectives. So I have no complaints, really.
And we'll definitely have to see what this. We'll have to do a follow-up one once this Unity saga eventually gets wrapped up. Well, we'll just be like,
Unity
okay.
saga and the crazy ending of Jimmy Olsen, I assume.
Yeah, whatever he transforms into next. Yeah.
Right.
We're gonna have to do what? What did this era represent? And maybe Unity might be a good idea where we finally start acknowledging all the history of Superman. We acknowledge the down-to-earth journalistic angle. We acknowledge the relationship with Lois. We acknowledge his father, and we acknowledge his son. And then we also acknowledge the craziness, the cosmic, the Jimmy Olsens, the weird transformations, and the gorillas. Like, will we have Unity finally? Maybe that's hopeful, but fuck, he's got it written on his chest, hope. So why not go for it?
Yeah.
But yeah, Adam, I can't thank you enough for doing this with me. This was an absolute treat. I would love to have you on again, even here, just to talk, maybe just do an episode on All-Star together, and even just in general, if you have any topics, I would love to do it. You are a brilliant guest, even nicer guy, so thank you for this, and thank you for all you do for the Superman community, man.
Oh, thank you so much. This was great. Just text me.
Get you on your single watch.
Yeah, hit me up on the Signal Watch. It's got a little A for Alfie on it, just so you all know. Only on a pitch that you can hear.
Just on a very British frequency.
Yeah.
All right, man. Just before we close up, where can I've been hyped it up a lot, but for anyone who's got this far and doesn't know where you are, I'm going to put a link in the description anyway. But where can people find you?
My one and only social media that I have as a person is at Talking Superman on Twitter, and that is it.
Well, there we have it. He's focused. But yeah, this has been Sing with Superman. We'll be back some other time. It's hard. This show is harder to get frequently because I want to make it a bit more personal than a lot of the other topics, but we'll definitely make sure this is a regular thing and a big event. So I hope you've enjoyed, and most importantly, everyone, take it easy.